everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join. We are at the top of the hour, so we will not delay. In the wake of the George Floyd death, I'm sure you may have seen in the news globally things that have occurred. We wanted to take the time out to have a live reviewed recording with our MIT leads as well as Sid. I'm Candace Williams. I'm the Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Manager here at GitLab. Some of the goals of the chat today are going to be to discuss what it's like to be Black at GitLab and in tech in general. Also, how to be an ally at this time and moving forward. We also have a link to a page that we're creating, an MR, where you can drop in links not only to support Black communities or Black-owned businesses, but also for LGBTQA as well as women. We're going to compile these links and establish new pages for each of those. But at this time, I want to actually turn it over to Sid to give a few comments of, in the wake of the George Floyd death and what that means right now and some of the statements he's already put out. So before we introduce our panel, I'll turn it over to Sid.
Thanks, Candace, and thanks for organizing this. Looking forward to the rest of this. Yeah, for me personally, since George Floyd died, the stories that came out were heartbreaking. I think the one that was very close was it was from some Latino friends in Y Combinator. They were in the same batch. We've grown super close friends, and they said that while they were in Mountain View, just riding on their bikes, they got harassed by the police. The police assumed they were from East Palo Alto, and they were like, they're threatening to give them a ticket for having no air in their tires, like something ridiculous. And it wasn't just the harassment, it was that they didn't feel comfortable sharing that story before. That they didn't do anything wrong, but they still felt like ashamed that that kind of happened to them. And I think that's the great thing that happened since then, that people realize it's not them, and it's okay to talk about it. And I'm glad we're having this meeting to talk about it.
Thank you for that. And with that, I'll take a moment to introduce our panel today. We have Erica Flowers and Sharif Bennett. They are Minorities in Tech ERG leads, and I'll let them introduce themselves and then take it back.
I am Erica Flowers, as Candace said, and I've been at GitLab for 2.5 years, and I manage the digital production team here at GitLab. So videos, audio, all that fun stuff. Sharif?
Thank you, Erica. Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday. My name is Sharif Bennett. I'm a mid-market account executive based in Atlanta, Georgia. I've been with GitLab just over a year. I hit my 1-year anniversary last week. So looking forward to this call, and thank you guys for joining.
Thank you, Sharif. Thank you, Erica. And thank you, Sid, as well. We're going to take this time now to let Erica and Sharif talk a little bit about what they're doing in the MIT group and some of the goals, as well as later on, you will hear from the MIT group members at large that will come onto the call as well, introduce themselves and ask a few questions and give a little bit of information that should help as far as what allyship looks like and things like that. So, Erica, if you'll tell us a little bit about some of the goals that you're working on right now with MIT, followed by Sharif and the mentorship program.
Sure. So just so people can get an idea about what Minorities in Tech is, essentially the group the purpose is to have a safe space for folks to come together, share their issues around working at GitLab or just other things in general, and then also introduce and move measures forward that will improve the minority employee experience here at GitLab. So this year we have 4 main goals. The first is recruitment. So helping to find ways that we can bring in more diverse talent. Internal outreach, so just getting more folks involved in these issues and increasing awareness about MIT as a whole, which is open to everyone. So you don't have to identify as a minority or be a minority to join the group. It's open for everyone. Also, events is our third priority. So granted, no one's moving about, but also just kind of creating partnerships, working with other groups and different companies, and then also having some visibility and participation at events, and even holding our own small events within the company and that sort of thing. And then lastly, mentorship. So I will let Sharif talk a little bit more about that as he is helping lead the charge on mentorship.
Thanks, Erica. So yes, the MIT group just launched a mentorship program. Part of the reason why it was launched is I and a lot of people who see eye to eye to this are of the belief that people of color and women are generally excluded from the mentorship process. I think there is an innate behavior for people who are in leadership positions to mentor people that remind them of themselves. It's both a natural behavior as well as learned. And if at corporations across the world, your people in positions of power are white males, then more than likely they're just going to mentor other white males, and thus the cycle of excluding women and minorities continues. So the way it works is we sent out a survey to people within the MIT group and asked who would like to participate for this this first iteration of it. We got back 20 responses, so we have 20 mentees. And what we did was align them with 20 mentors in particular areas of focus in which these mentees have an interest in. And it's very diverse across the boards. It includes finance, engineering, marketing, sales, et cetera. And what we're doing is it's a 3-month-long iteration with the goal of that mentee identifying a particular gap that exists in a functional area in which they're interested in. They then identify that problem and then present a solution to that problem. So it's a 3-month-long internship/project, which at the end of the 3 months, there will be an awards ceremony and a prize given to the winning group within each category, because it's very difficult to rank an engineering project versus, say, a marketing project. So we're going with different prizes for each function. Now, the benefits of it are multifaceted. It's easy to think like, oh, well, you know, the minorities themselves, the participants, they benefit by getting a mentor, but it also goes both ways. As Erica stated, recruitment is also one of our big initiatives for MIT. And as GitLab goes public, one of the ways that we'll have to differentiate ourselves from our competition and organizations that have had a head start on us in the tech world is to be able to advocate for a program like this, where we can tell people fresh out of college, people fresh out of grad school or whatever, who are young, who have interests, and say to them, look, Facebook is great. It's a great company. Amazon, they're great companies, but do you have direct access to the VP of Facebook within 6 to 8 months of being there? We have a program that can help you understand what your potential career trajectory at this organization can be. So if you have any questions regarding the program, please reach out to Erica and myself, and we'll be more than happy to speak with you about it.
Thank you for that, Sharif, and thank you, Erica. And we've spoken a little bit about what the goals of MIT are. We talked as well about, you know, what the mentorship and the purpose of that is. So speaking about preparing people for the workforce that are Black, I would love to hear like a first person experience of when a time in your professional experience of what that was like. Sharif, we can start with you. I would love to hear about what that might look like with being Black in tech.
It's certainly interesting. I think to properly frame this, maybe I need to take a step back, right? And overall, I'm American, born and raised here. So from the lens that I come through, is going to be an American bias or a US bias. And I think one of the things that's important to know, and we all need to understand this, is that over the past 60 years, America's done a very good job of saying that racism is bad. Where America has fundamentally done a poor job is in explaining to people what racism actually is, right? And so I like to think of an iceberg, right? I'm sure many of you have seen the movie Titanic, right? Racism is kind of like an iceberg. I think most people are aware or can see the tip of that iceberg. They think racism, oh, that's shouting a racial epithet. Oh, that's a cross burning. That's all they see about racism, when in actuality, it runs much deeper and larger. And if people don't educate themselves as to what racism actually is, if institutions and corporations don't educate themselves as to what racism actually is, it is just a matter of time before you hit that iceberg. and you find yourself swimming in a sea of public outcry, hoping that someone throws you a life raft. Now, the actual story itself, right? So about 5 or 6 years ago, when I was back in school, I was part of an internship program for a company who I will not name. It was a 10-week-long internship program. I thought it was going well. No one ever said anything negative about the work it is that I was doing. During the last 2 weeks of this internship program is when evaluations were happening, and the people who they felt had done the best job, quote unquote, would be offered the opportunity for full-time employment. So I certainly thought that I was in, the category for this. One of the only Black senior manager, we were having dinner and drinks a few days before the program ended, had said to me that he had been in a room when they were going over the 12 participants of this program and trying to identify who the best candidates were. He had told me that, Sharif, we were in the room and your name came up, and someone made the analogy of, or not analogy, someone said flat out, they thought you were scary. They were fearful of you. Now, for those of you who I've never met in person, I am 6'3". So, maybe I'm bigger than the average person. But what this person didn't do, as I like to say, is they didn't check the back of my baseball card. If they had, they would have noted that I, prior to going back to school, was a stand-up comic for 1 full year while I was in Chicago. And after doing 1 full year of stand-up, I actually trained at Improv Olympic and Second City in Chicago. So I'm a trained comic. Not like I tell dirty jokes on the side, but I'm actually trained to be in front of people and be comedic and funny. So to say that they were fearful of me was absolutely ludicrous, right? But keep in mind what happened. So in that moment, my Ivy League degrees didn't matter. The work I had done for the 8 weeks or 9 weeks prior to that statement being said didn't matter. The fact that I had trained at Second City Improv Olympic and had done stand-up didn't matter. All this person did was utter, I'm scared of him. Now, let's go back to the iceberg metaphor. Once again, a cross was not burned at my desk. A racial epithet wasn't said about me. But if you look deeper into that iceberg of racism, you'll see right in the middle or towards the bottom, one of the common phrases used to describe people of color is one of fear, that they are intimidating, they're scary, they're fearful. So the question becomes well, was this racist? Absolutely, it was, because this person in a position of power was able to exclude and prevent me from potentially gaining access to full-time employment. That is textbook definition racism. And it happens every day across corporations in America, not just at that company, but everywhere.
Thank you for that, Sharif. Those are things that are just snippets of what we need to be cognizant of, how we can be better allies, how we can look at things differently, and how we can show up and be the voice for others that don't necessarily have a voice, and how we can change the theme and the outcome just by speaking up on their behalf. Great story, Sharif. Erica, I would like to take a moment before we allow Sid to come in to have a bit of a discussion on, after your responses to your story, to have a follow-up. I would love to hear an experience of yours in your space of what it's like to be Black in tech.
Thanks, Candace, and thanks, Sharif, for that story. And just to, take a bit of a, lead from what Sharif said, I find that, the assumptions tend to be an issue, like the scary assumption. Sometimes I've found, and particularly even here at GitLab, that folks will take something that they hear from someone about someone else, right? And for instance, for myself. And instead of getting to know me or trying to, suss out maybe what the intention behind whatever the issue is, they just kind of go off of the assumption of whatever the person has said. So therefore, by default, I don't get an opportunity to just have a relationship with someone. It's based off of what someone else has to say. And when you encounter those situations, I would like to, impress upon folks the importance of, taking the time yourself to figure out, who that person is and get to know them, because you don't necessarily know the motivation behind why someone has an issue with someone. Sometimes it could be something that you don't want to even think about, or isn't something that you would, judge someone on, but not everybody is the same. So I would just keep that in mind, because a lot of times when you're walking in the door as a person of color, or someone from, a disenfranchised group, there are assumptions made. People approach you just based off of what they see and what they think they know. So I would just want to put that out there. And I think another issue, a particular story, I'm not going to go into grave detail, but what I will say is that as folks are kind of thinking about what has been going on, and folks are starting to feel a little bit more comfortable about having conversations, I've had at least a few people say to me in the last just couple of weeks that they are noticing, or they've noticed, that I can say something in a meeting, right? I'll have a voice, I'll have an opinion, I'll have an approach to something, and it's not considered, or it's not taken seriously until it's validated by someone else. So someone else has to almost legitimize what I say before it becomes something that's actionable, and before it becomes something that is taken seriously. And that is difficult. It's difficult to, do your job, frankly, or move about, the workplace when you say something, but it's still not seen as valid until someone else says, I approve of that message, right? So, I know women in general have that issue in tech, but it is kind of doubled down when, for instance, you're a minority woman, or a Black woman. So there's always an automatic assumption that I don't know necessarily of what I speak, or maybe I don't know it as well. And so someone has to make it okay before, we can move forward with my thoughts. So it has been nice to hear that I'm not kind of feeling this way or being quote unquote sensitive, because people love to say that if there's an issue, a minority person is being overly sensitive. So I'm just glad that people are already thinking about that, and that they're coming to terms with it, they're realizing it, and they're speaking up against it. And some folks have even said, I'm going to just say, like Erica said, boom, and that's it. So it doesn't have to be this justification, and it's or Erica already said that, so that's what we're doing, and then moving forward. So that's nice that action is being taken, but it's something to think about. So those would be the things that I would like to have folks walk away from this conversation, thinking about moving forward as assumptions, and also, allowing people to have a voice and not needing someone else to legitimize said voice before it's considered valid.
Those are very, very, very critical points. I think, I hope that what everybody has gleaned from that is allowing someone to tell their own story. If you have an opinion of someone or an assumption, just as the bias training we had just recently this past week, allow someone else to tell their story. Or if you've been told a story about someone, or you have your own personal assumption, allow them to change that assumption. Allow them to reinvent what you automatically thought. Other things that I want to make sure that, as Erica has stated, are you think about, validating someone else's voice. Those are good actions to follow up with, to say, as Erica said, or as this other individual had said. So kind of be cognizant of those things as you're having that dialogue. I would love to hear from Sid now in regards to, after hearing these two stories and from a position of allyship, has there been a time where you've had to act an ally, and what your thoughts are on what Erica and Sharif have said so far?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks to both of you for sharing the story. And Erica, thanks for sharing a story that's happening at GitLab right now that's making it really real. And I'm sad to hear that that has been your experience. I think being an ally means making sure that people can speak up. And for the last year, I've been focusing on female voices. And I was in a meeting yesterday where the only female in the Zoom call, had the best point of the entire meeting, but was the last of all the people in the meeting to speak up. And I do notice that males interrupt other people more frequently than females do the same. And those are like tough things to kind of fix. And I think it takes attention from leadership to make sure that people are heard, and that people that are less likely to speak up or speak over someone explicitly get the word without making it awkward, because I've also done that where it's like, hey, please close out the meeting. And then, oh, they didn't expect that. And I put them in a difficult position. So that's tough. Sharif's story about like hiring processes also reminded me of something I've seen at GitLab. I've seen the criteria I used: would I drink a beer with this person, as a hiring criterion? And that made me super mad, to be frank. And that person certainly heard it. And I've not seen that behavior since, but that was a clear indication of kind of hiring a buddy, because this person was very much more likely to drink a beer with someone who's consuming alcohol. We got a lot of Mormons working at GitLab who don't consume alcohol, for example. And I bet all his beer drinking buddies are male and white and cisgendered and all those things. So it's a horrible criteria. And even to this day, some startups in Silicon Valley use the airport test. Would I hang out at an airport with this person for a couple of hours to make a hiring decision? I think that's very flawed. I'm proud that, at least in theory, at GitLab, we hire based on our values and not whether you like the person. And I hope that is also practice. And please tell me when it's not. Yeah, that will be my quick response.
Thank you so much for that, Sid. Before we jump into a couple of questions that Erica and Sharif have for you, as well as the MIT group coming into the conversation at large, I would love to know, Erica or Sharif, do you have any additional thoughts for GitLab as a whole, for what we need to kind of focus on to be better allies, or anything else to emphasize before we move forward with those questions that you have for Sid?
One of the things I would say is don't be afraid or hesitant to jump into any of the ERG calls. You know, maybe you're too shy to join or that sort of thing, but, you know, sometimes just popping into one of the calls or reaching out to one of the leads or writing something on one of the channels and saying, hey, I'm interested, you know, that'll allow you to kind of learn more of what's happening, what folks are talking about, and how you can be an ally or be of support to any initiatives that are going on. So it's kind of important, again, to reach out to folks that aren't necessarily like yourself, because frankly, on the converse side, people of color are doing that every day, all day, right? Because that's how you have to operate in the workplace. So the onus is, you know, I think sometimes on other folks, if you really want to be an ally, and it's, you know, step out and you know, say, hey, I want to help, or I want to sit in, I want to learn something.
Oh, thanks for that invitation. I'll do so, and I encourage other people to do so as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess from my standpoint, it's twofold. One, to be an ally for people of color, you have to know what racism is, right? You can't just, being an ally means you're also educated on what's actually going on, right? So the start right there is, if you want to be an ally, you have to do some critical thinking, right? Second step, I think, is people of color can't be everywhere to police what's racist, right? If you see something, say something, speak up, question what you think are, what might be biased assumptions that people are having, and don't be afraid to say what it is, to get it out there. Because I'm willing to bet if you challenge someone, you'll see what it is they're really thinking.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So leading with that,
Yeah, I would just want to chime in and say yes, word that like it's not up to the people being treated wrongly to speak up and resolve it. It's up to us treating people right. And every time we get a signal that something is off, that is a signal that we should put a complete fix in place. It's not a support desk. It's something that shouldn't happen in the first place, and we should find the root cause and address those.
Thank you for that, Sid. With that, as we approach the next step part of our conversation with Sid, Sharif and Erica, would you like to each take an opportunity to ask Sid a question, and then we'll go into our MIT group at large.
Sure. I guess I'll shoot first. Sid, earlier you mentioned sort of hiring questions. I wanted to get some of your thoughts around, hiring retention practices for people of color here at GitLab. What we have planned, and if there's any KPIs to sort of support that initiative.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think right now we're focusing on top of funnel, so kind of the candidates we reach out to. We hope that will help with bottom of funnel, the offers and the hires we make. We're not super focused on retention of Black people right now, just because we have so few that first of all, it's hard to measure. But we have the ERG groups, and I think some initiatives will come from that. I also hear you on the mentorship. I think from the start, the CEO Shadow Program, which is my biggest mentorship initiative, we accounted for the eligibility criteria there. I think accounting for female representation was in there from the start. I'm not sure there was underrepresented minorities in there from the start, but there sure is now. Last change we made to those criteria was kind of intersectionality, where you could stack the different underrepresented groups criteria. Yeah, I wonder what your ideas are. I think we've made some progress over the last couple of months in retention. The graphs I'm watching most closely is gender retention, because those we have higher numbers there, so they're more significant. But that we don't have the numbers, that doesn't mean we can do more. What do you think we should do, if any?
Thank you for that. Erica, do you have a question of Sid?
Sure. I think it's going to kind of go back to what I was saying before about my story. But this may be something more to think about, but just off bat, how do we as a company, as an organization, ensure that, minority voices, particularly Black voices, are being heard in their roles and don't need that validation to be made actionable, and that on top of that, their professional needs, meaning, resources, support, and that sort of thing, are actually, that they request, are actually being taken seriously?
Yeah, I think it's a task of any leader to make sure that kind of the people that are in the meeting, or the people that should be heard, are there. And that can be, sometimes that's about different functions being there. Like yesterday I said, hey, why isn't product invited to this meeting? But it should also be like, hey, why aren't women invited to the meeting? Or if they're in the meeting and they aren't speaking up, why is that? And same for underrepresented minorities. I think it's one thing I like about GitLab is that we tend to use a Google Doc for asking questions. And I see that whenever we're not doing that, it tends to be the loudest voices, which are frequently very white and male, that get more airtime. So most meetings I'm in, I try to keep the discipline that we go off the list in the Google Docs, so everyone has equal access to that. The second part was hinting at something we could be doing and aren't doing. You want to elaborate on that? And if not in this call, maybe one-on-one or in another way?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think kind of overall in general, it's kind of like you even said before, the squeaky wheel, or the loudest voices, right? So it's just something I think we as managers and up need to be mindful of, is that, you know, sometimes folks don't even feel comfortable being the squeaky wheel, right? For whatever reasons, but also because of the fact that, you know, you almost feel like there's more scrutiny and, you know, laser focus on what you say and do, being either a woman or a woman and a minority or that sort of thing. So I think being mindful of, like, are people getting the resources and support that they need to do their job as best as possible without having to, you know, struggle or run themselves into the ground or something like that. So that would just
Yeah. One thing that comes to mind, and there's a lot of ways to take this, but I've seen a few times in the higher management team, the behavior, and this wasn't specifically about minorities, but like, oh, those people are always complaining, or don't they have a job to do? And I think that's super, super bad, that we are about results. So I think of like, evaluate people by the results they achieve. And if apart from that, they spend a ton of time complaining about endpoint management. By the way, this example I mentioned happened years ago with an executive that is no longer at the company. So that wasn't it. But like, there's a lot of people right now complaining about endpoint management. And I think there's an instinctive reaction to say, don't they have a job to do? Well, they do, and they're doing that job, and that's up to their manager to evaluate. But we should never kind of penalize people for being the squeaky wheel or complaining or making suggestions. Our mission is everyone can contribute. You're going to have a ton of contributions, and you don't have to follow up on each and every one of them. Although it's nice that you let people know they're hurt, because that rhymes with belonging. But maybe it's a good thing to explicitly call it out. We should be a company with people kind of giving us feedback, and then sometimes feedback is a bit squeaky, and I'd rather not hear that people are basing opinions on you on hearsay and that you're not being heard in meetings. That's not pleasant to hear, but it's important to hear, and it's actionable, and I can take that back. So maybe it's worth a call out in our results value.
Yeah, and so just to follow up on your earlier question of what are other things GitLab can do, I think from a transparency standpoint, it would be nice to see just sort of, you know, what are the, obviously the percentages of people of color who are employed at GitLab are one thing, but in order to get a better understanding of how we're getting there, it's like, we also need to take a look at what percentage of people of color are even being interviewed for certain roles, right? Like if we see that there's a higher percentage of people in one particular focus here at GitLab, whether that be marketing or sales, and we're not seeing those same numbers at engineering, we need to sort of ask, well, why is that? And what are the sales marketing teams doing that could potentially be implemented for the engineering group? And I'm just throwing those groups out as examples. I'm not quite sure of what those actual diversity numbers are.
Yeah, the action that we've taken last week, Dave, who's leading the recruiting team, on my suggestion, made a change. We upped the ratio of our top of funnel from 40 to 50% through outbound recruiting. So 50% of the people is us reaching out. And then of that, 80% of the candidates will add to our diversity, 80 or 90%. So we're in a situation where we are hiring right now less than we thought a while ago, but we're still hiring, and we have extra recruiting capacity, and we're going to use that capacity to add to our diversity. And I think I'd be glad to walk you or anybody else who's interested through that. But I think it's going to make a big difference. The last time I looked at the numbers, they were good, but also on Sunday when I was hiking, someone sent me a message via Facebook Messenger, and it was the wife of someone who was declined. So people are getting a bit overly excited when we reach out for that initial conversation. There's still interviews to be had, but both anecdotally and in the numbers I've seen, it's going to make a huge impact. So I'm pretty sure we're turning the corner there. I think what I'm struggling with is how can, as a company, we make a dent in also kind of broadening the pool of people and making sure that there's more, the steps on the ladder to get here are easier. And I've got some things I've done privately, but I struggle what the role of us as a company is there.
Thank you. Thank you, all three of you, for that. In essence of time, we're at 12:05. I'm sorry, I'm doing my own time. We have about 15 minutes left. With that being said, I want to have an opportunity to turn this over as well to have some MIT members come in, as well as take a couple of questions out of the document. What we aren't able to answer, we will drop answers in later and you can reference it. But at this time, do we have any MIT members who would like to come in and ask a few questions or have a couple of comments as far as follow-up?
I'd like to say something. Hi, I'm Darva, for you who don't know me. I'm the Senior Engineering Manager interim for the CREATE team. And one thing that I always look at are promotion numbers and the underrepresented groups that are being promoted within GitLab. And what I would like to see is for the management to be intentionally removing bias by adding more processes. I feel like when managers are deciding, let's say, when to consider someone for promotion, it's based on a feeling and not an actual like intentional thought process, or based on whichever team members are more vocal about wanting a promotion. So I find that I know a lot of people don't want a lot of processes and standardization, but that really does help remove bias, all types of bias. So I think as managers, we should just review some of the things that we do, the way we assign projects or the way we promote people, and think, is there a way for me to do this in a more standard approach so that bias won't be introduced? That's it.
Is it okay if I answer that one?
Sure.
Or add to it more than answer. I totally agree. I don't think we're there yet. For example, sometimes two people are promoted exactly at the same time, which is super coincidence. And I think it's because that manager has a tough time explaining to the vocal person why they wouldn't get a promotion if that other person gets it. So I think what you call out is true. More vocal people, and we know that underrepresented groups tend to be less vocal about asking for a promotion. That's certainly happening, and we should reduce that. One instrument we're planning to roll out to help with that is talent assessments. So a 9-box exercise. So the last e-group offsite, we did one. And one thing we used there to reduce bias in a small way is to call out every candidate that added to our diversity to make sure that we could spot if there was a pattern in those people be graded less favorably. And we're gonna roll out those talent assessments probably throughout the company so that there's more intentionality on like who's on track to be promoted on the future, to have more visibility there. Data-wise, right now, it's, I don't have the data we need. We have between 11 and 13% promotions at any level every year, but I don't have data how that is across different departments, let alone trying to see how that is. Well, the first thing would be gender diversity, because the data would be, we have higher numbers there, so the data would be higher signal. But that would be the next step after we get the initial numbers, which is still which we don't have at the moment. Is that in the direction of what you were getting at, Darva?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Darva. Thank you, Sid. Do we have another member from the MIT group?
Sure. Yeah, I do. Good morning, everyone. I'm Rashad Bartholomew of Oakland, California, account executive. So, Sid, much like you, I believe in results, and I believe everyone can contribute. And so with that in mind, I've been wondering what GitLab is doing to contribute to racial equality. A group of us put together an issue, which I just posted in the chat, looking to have GitLab do matching donations. And so I was wondering what your take was on that. I understand that a lot of other companies a lot of our peers have done this. And given that we haven't done Contribute this year, seems like this might be another great place to divert those funds and resources. What do you think?
Yeah, I'm aware that some other companies have done that. I don't directly have an opinion. Right now, we don't do that. One of the reasons cited is that right now we're not profitable. So we're spending other people's money, and there's a certain higher threshold for that. But on the other hand, I know of some companies that are like venture funded and not making money yet and still do that. For example, HashiCorp, I think, does that. So I haven't made up my mind on these things yet, and I think I see it. I think Carol would be the executive to come up with a proposal here.
All right, thanks. I'll follow up with Carol.
Thanks for making a proposal.
Thanks, Rashad, for that. And thank you, Emily Chin, as well, for working with him to create that issue. Thanks so much for that. Do we have additional comments and questions from our MIT group before we drop into our Google Doc?
Yeah, I've got a question. Can you hear me? My speaker's looking funny.
We can hear you.
There you go. There we go. So thank you, Candace, and thank you, my MIT co-members, for hosting this. This is just so timely and so welcome. I appreciate it. My question is for Sid, and thank you for showing up, Sid. Thank you for just being vulnerable and sharing your story and showing your support. I'm curious about the article you posted in the Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Slack channel. I think it was Sunday. I think it was around tech companies asking their Black employee groups to fix Silicon Valley's race problem, I believe was the title. I'll post it in the chat. I'm curious what your view is on this, and if and how you see GitLab addressing this, possibly expanding the D&I team where it's not just one person, Candace only, and we can't clone her, or what your thoughts are on, I must be upfront, I'm opposed to this, time diversity efforts to executive pay. Curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, well, I posted the article because I thought it was a good call out that sometimes the underrepresented groups in a company are called upon to help with these initiatives without there being an explicit allotment of their time. Candace is full-time on this, so she's being paid, she's evaluated on those results. But what if you invest a ton of time in this, but it's not part of like the results you have to produce as, for example, an engineer or a salesperson? Like Sharif is not getting a lower quota because he's helping with these things. So I'd be, for example, if the mentorship program was mentoring minorities, I'd be super concerned, because that's a burden. We want the whole company, or burden, it can be fun too, but that's time spent we want to allocate across the company. So I'm glad to hear, I think I understood that the mentorship is everyone contributing, but then it's still the question, okay, what about the coordination costs? And we should make sure it doesn't come, the people contributing, it doesn't come at their expense. So that's why I posted the article.
Thank you, Sid.
Well, thank you, Lorna, for your question. Thanks so much. So we are near ending the time. However, I want to make sure we get to a couple of questions from the Google Doc. Please, someone feel free to verbalize your question, and if time allows, we'll go to the next question and then we'll conclude it and drop in answers as best as we can.
Candace, I have a question that was previously answered by Sid, but I have a question on his response. It's in regard to DARVA's process around promotions. Is that okay to ask a question on that? Okay. I don't really understand why having data not available doesn't mean we can't put more prescription in place around the career development framework. Like, for example, maybe we add more guidelines around time and position and tenure, or you must be in your current role performing at an expert level for X amount of time, so that managers are more cognizant and aware of evaluating all of their direct reports at the same standard. I feel like that's a process improvement we can make that is irrelevant to whether or not we have data on promotions for minorities. What is your thoughts on that, Sid?
Yeah, I think that's a good call out, and I think I structured my answer a bit. Oh, we have fewer data. That doesn't mean we shouldn't. It should be a good process. Kind of the same for like retention and promotion rate of underrepresented minorities. Like that we don't have data doesn't say that we shouldn't put an effort there. And I think I was a bit confusing in my answer. So you're right. It makes it harder to measure whether there's a problem and whether you fixed it, but that doesn't mean you can't do things that just make sense anyway.
I think being proactive about our behaviors, especially around treating everybody equally and then accommodating for social injustice, is really important. And we should just be evaluating everybody the same. So,
yeah.
Okay.
One thing I haven't seen happening is like, I think we make open all the promotion documents, and I think I personally review like 2/3 or 3/4 of them, make sure they're based on data, that there's enough things. So one of the reasons is to be able to call out like, hey, this person got promoted and they have like 300 great links of what they did, and this person got promoted and it was a bunch of well, there was few links in there and a few results in there. So it's kind of a way, like it's super important. Like your values are basically who you promote in a company. Why do you get promoted? Those are your values. So that's very important to get right. And I don't know of another company sharing those documents, but what I kind of hoped for was also people calling out like, hey, that promotion doesn't make sense to me. Compare these two or something like that. I haven't heard that happening. I don't hear everything.
Instead, if I can add something too about that, the promotion data that we have, there actually is an open issue to add all of this into Sisense. We have been tracking some of this in Google spreadsheets where we use a % of population. And one thing that I know we've been talking about with Candace as well is how do we distinguish what those groupings are? How do we, as a global company, state what, categories that we would use in order to make sure that we're assessing that data appropriately. So while we don't have data that we would feel comfortable sharing at this moment, it is a total work in progress, and we want to make sure everybody feels comfortable contributing to that issue as well.
Cool. Yeah. So an idea would be to have it per department, but also to have it per gender and per ethnicity, with some error bands as well. Thanks, Brittany.
Thank you, Brittany, and thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Sid, for your response. I know that we're 18 minutes past. The call is to end in 2 minutes. That said, we might not have time to start another question. However, I hope that everyone will leave this conversation today with a newfound appreciation for what you've learned, whether it's coming from being an ally, ways to support. Please contribute to the MR that you see in the link for the document. Please find ways to be a voice for others who don't always have a voice. Please continue to just be an advocate all the way around, and we're all here as resources to support each other. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend, and have a great afternoon, evening, and good morning.